Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
He'd order one side of the menu from eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. He emptied the kitchen.
My guest today is the multi-talented actor of stage, film, and television, Victor Garber. Garber began his acting career as a child, which we will of course discuss, and later worked as a folk singer before his breakthrough role as Jesus in the musical Godspell in Toronto, Canada, with a cast that included, wait for this, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Gilda Radner, Paul Schaefer, and Martin Short. He went on to appear on Broadway in the original productions of Sweeney Todd, Noises Off, Art, Damn Yankees, and many, many others. For his Broadway work, he's been nominated for 4 Tony Awards and has also received the Theatre World Life Achievement Award. On film, he repeated his role as Jesus in the movie version of Godspell and has had featured and starring roles in Sleepless in Seattle, The First Wives Club, Argo, Legally Blonde, and as shipbuilder Thomas Andrews in James Cameron's blockbuster film Titanic, among many, many other movie roles. On television, he starred in the series thriller Alias, for which he received 3 Emmy nominations, and also starred in the series Justice and Eli Stone. He's also appeared as a guest star on many of television's most popular shows, including Frasier, Will and Grace, 30 Rock, Blue Buds, Nurse Jackie, and many others. The owner of this extraordinary career, Victor Garber, welcome to Cooking by Heart.
Who are you talking about? Because I'm not. I think, honestly, it's just shocking every time I hear anybody, do this. But thank you. Thank you.
Oh, please, my pleasure. We'll talk about that bit in a moment, but I want to start by talking provenance, because that's the way we usually start the show, and it also has so much to do with the food we eat and our families and what the show's about. So tell me about where Victor Garber came from. Where were you born?
I was born in London, Ontario, which is a small town near Toronto, about a 2-hour drive. It's now actually, because as a university that's well known, University of Western Ontario, but now has a film festival, which is shocking.
Wow.
Yes, and I'm being honored there, because why not? It's really evolved, this little town that I grew up in. And I started out in children's theater there. That's where it all started for me, because, yeah.
Your bio says that you started acting when you were 8 or 9 years old?
Yeah.
At that theater?
It's the Grand Theater. It's over 100 years old. It's still there. It's a beautiful old theater. And it was my refuge. It was my lifeline growing up, because I knew that I didn't really fit in. And I was trying to find a place to fit in. And of course, the theater.
Yes.
Kind of not unlike the circus.
Well, this comes from a lot of actors who talk about, not feeling that they were other when they were growing up. And I think I felt that way in a different sort of way, in the sense that I grew up with immigrant parents, although your lineage is immigrant as well, yes?
Yes. Yeah, both my parents were born in Canada, but it's Polish-Russian.
Right.
My mother's side was Russian, my father's side was Polish, and my grandmothers both lived in London, Ontario, and I had cousins so it was a family unit based there.
Right. Now tell me about mom and dad.
Well, mom and dad were, well, that's why I'm in therapy. Mom and dad were, my mother was a kind of a celebrity growing up. She was a band singer when she was younger. She married my father, who was, 9 or 10 years older. She was quite a beauty.
Mm-hmm. Local celebrity?
She was definitely a large local celebrity. She had her own television show.
Oh, golly.
When I was growing up, called At Home with Hope Garber. And the irony was that she was not a really good homemaker. But she was really She was smart. She was very pleasant company, and people, people were interviewed all the time. Christopher Plummer was the biggest star she ever had.
Now, was Mom a cook?
No. Mom, I wouldn't say that. No, I do remember she could make roast beef.
Mm-hmm.
It was often our Sunday dinner. And my father actually was more savvy, I think, with food. But no, we ate Chinese food every Sunday night out.
Right.
Great Chinese restaurant. And I became a type 1 diabetic when I was 12. So everything about food changed, of course, because the only thing I ever wanted to eat was sugar.
Yeah.
But I stopped that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say that Dad had a hand in the cooking at home as well? I mean, was Mom around at dinner time? Did you guys gather around the table and eat?
A lot of the time we did, but they both were working. My father had a ladies' retail store in London, in the east part of London, and my mother was always on television. So we always had some kind of caretaker. What they would call an au pair, I guess. But it was really someone who could make us lunch, make sure we got home okay, and all of that.
Right.
And that could be a novel in itself. But
now, did you come home for lunch? Did you live close enough to come home for lunch?
Yeah, I was blocks away from our public school.
That
was nice. I all of that stuff I took for granted, and then of course I realized how fortunate I was after I left.
Right.
I remember my father used to make great French toast, which I loved.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that, and my mother used to make roast beef, which I loved. My grandmother, she was the baker. She would make, cookies, and so I was, chubby.
By the way, welcome to the club. As I was until I was like 12 or 13, and I was put on a diet, but this has nothing to do with our show. Was Grandma around a lot? Yes,
both grandmothers were alive, and my father's mother lived around the block, like a ways around the block. But I could get there easily on my bike or walk even, and I spent a lot of time with her. She was very nurturing and smart and funny, and I had a great relationship with her. And she kind of was in a way a surrogate mother, because my mother was working all the time.
Yeah. Was she a cook, Grandma?
Yes, she made all I remember are the rugla, or I think they were called rugla then.
Yeah.
Those cookies. Those cake cookies. And I remember she was a really good baker, and hence type 1 diabetes.
Yeah. Well, are you drawing a direct line between the fact that you were eating a lot of sugar when you were a kid and the fact that you developed it?
Well, that's only in my. I've made that up somewhat because they don't really know. It's an autoimmune disease, and they don't really know. It's not in our family genetically that they can trace. Right. At the time, I was chubby, and I assume that it was largely to do with my diet that I managed to become a diabetic. Right. But there's no.
Do you think that it was heavy in, say, highly processed carbohydrates and sugar and, which is the sort of normal diet for that time? Because we both grew up at about the same time, even though in different countries, but where processed food, white bread, the whole 9 yards was very prevalent.
The more I read about all of these things, and now I'm reading a book about Alzheimer's, and I'm seeing the correlation with our diet. It's which of course makes great sense. All the processed foods and all how we've completely diminished the quality of food,
right?
And never mind the pesticides and all of that. There is a direct correlation to all of these diseases, right. And I believe that's a problem that we're all dealing with now.
Yeah, exactly. As a culture. Yeah. Particularly in this country with obesity and any number of other problems that we're running into. But let's get back to the family for a little bit. So now, siblings?
Yes, I have an older brother, a younger sister.
What was it like around the table?
It was generally congenial and fun. My father was a drinker, not a heavy drinker at the time that I remember, but he would come home and pour a couple of shots. And I wasn't, it just seemed normal to me. But now, as I look back, he was not happy. He didn't like where he was his job that he had he took over his mother's store at a certain point. Mm-hmm. He was an unhappy guy. He was depressed. That was the word that I learned very young.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was we had quite an interesting family. I mean, my mother, when they decided to separate or divorce, my mother actually was seeing this social worker in Toronto. She would drive to Toronto, which was 2 hours drive, 2.5 hour drive. And she arranged for family counseling when I was 11, I think. My sister was 8. My brother was 14. So we actually sat as a family having family counseling, which, everyone thought was extremely odd.
Yeah. Back then it was, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it was unconventional, certainly.
Yeah.
But I remember it as being a kind of life-changing experience for me. Because it kind of put things in perspective. And I also had an understanding of my parents, which maybe that's not the point when you're 11, but I knew that things weren't, working.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about it makes me envious in some ways because I had a rather dysfunctional family as well and no understanding of what the problem was, other than my mother was perpetually unhappy,
Yes.
and my father was a sort of looming figure, disapproving very often over the fact that I was not interested in going into the restaurant business, which is where I worked all through my formative years, all through until I went away to college. But back at the table, was it a raucous table? Was there a lot of, what was the conversation like at the table?
My father had a great sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember he was funny, and he loved to make jokes, and he loved to make us laugh. So that was a very bonding thing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of humor, and there was a lot of music in our household. My mother was a singer. My father played the piano. My brother and I had guitars when we were very young. And so there was always music. And that was, I think, and as I'm talking about it now, I realize how important that was.
Oh.
For me and for all of us. And I went on to pursue a career. My sister was actually, who's a really good singer. Mm-hmm. She sang for a long time in Toronto. And she actually made a record, and she was in a singing group, and she was doing pretty well, but she finally decided it wasn't the life she wanted. And she wasn't getting, the breaks that
right.
I think some people get. So
which is a great part of it, by the way.
Huge part of it.
Yeah. For my audience, I think that, very often that actors, actresses, singers, what have you, who are successful because of the talent will surmount everything. But very often it's a matter of not only the talent, but also luck, serendipity. It just, shit happens.
Yes. Determination, belief in oneself. Yeah. All of those things play into anyone's life.
Yeah.
I don't remember it as an unhappy childhood, but I do remember it as a kind of fraught.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. And food then was not necessarily a part of the assuaging of that feeling of, this is where we sit down and we're calm and we have there's fellowship around the table and community and family.
Well, I think there was always the attempt.
Right.
To
well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned, yeah. Not always successful.
I see.
But our Sunday nights at the Chinese restaurant were always good because the food was so good, and we were out of the house, and it was a kind of a ritual, and I remember that as being a good experience. But I left home when I was 16.
Ah.
I look back now and I think I quit school when I was 16. I had not finished grade 9.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was repeating grade 9 because I failed. And I knew that I was going to leave home when I was 16. And my parents supported it in a way because they knew there was no stopping me. And I look back now and I think, I meet these 16-year-olds and I think, how did I do that? I honestly look at, and a type 1 diabetic, going through and just really growing up.
Right.
But it was a life-saving move for me.
At that time, when you made this decision, you were obviously performing.
Well, I was a folk singer then in those days.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So I played the guitar and I sang and I had a good voice.
Yeah.
And so I went to Toronto. When I was 15, I was accepted at a university. It was an offer to learn how to act.
Right.
With a number of teachers, but it was for teachers. I remember Robert Gill, who was the head in Toronto.
Is this the Hart House?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hart House, which they say I graduated from the University of Toronto. I spent 6 weeks the next summer course when I was 15.
Wow.
That was my education.
Right.
Once I got there, I found that and this woman who was a wonderful folk singer, much older, and she bought a house, and she said, if you want to ever move to Toronto, I'll rent you a room in my house. And that's what happened, and I did.
And how did you eat when you were away from home?
Badly. I ate badly. I honestly remember going to a restaurant around the corner from where I was living. I was so excited to be living in Toronto, and they were toasted Danish pastries. I don't know if they do that anymore, but they used to cut a Danish pastry in half, put it on a grill, so there's a lot of fat, and then put it in front of you. And I can't imagine that I lived through that, but I did. Because it was not good for me.
I was going to say. So you weren't on a particular diet.
Well, I was supposed to be.
Yeah, but you were eating basically what you could. So you were eating out a lot?
Yes, I ate out all the time. And when I think back, I was conscious of being aware that I had to, take care of myself. But honestly, it's amazing that I got through as unscathed as much as I did.
Well, and also the resilience of youth, I think, probably had something to do with it as well. I mean, just the fact that we are, whatever, was going on in the organism, it's more apt to be able to fight things off when you're younger.
Absolutely.
So while you're in Toronto, you're doing a lot of eating out. You're not eating particularly healthily. Any food discoveries now that you're away from home where you go, oh my God, where has that been all my life now that I'm in the big city?
Well, the toasted Danish was sort of the pinnacle. I was open to eating really anything, but there was not I never really cooked anything. I was always at someone's house or in a restaurant. So I didn't really start cooking until much later in my life. And I went through a macrobiotic phase. I went through, where I learned, I made tofu pies and, which I really, really actually enjoyed.
This is later?
Much later.
Oh, okay.
I was a folk singer. I was in the Yorkville area in Toronto, which is a famous area now where Joni Mitchell and Neil Young played.
Right.
All these things. And there was a bar called a coffee house called Penny Farthing. And I used to wash dishes. And then I would go out and play guitar and sing and pass a hat around. That was my.
Oh, so you were working in the restaurant part of the club.
I wouldn't call it a restaurant.
Ah, okay. All right.
Nothing that would pique your interest at the moment. No.
Okay.
Nothing.
At some point, you formed a group, or you became part of a group?
Oh, yes. Now, when all of this happened, Peter Mann, who was sort of a mentor to me, was a rich kid's son, and his father bought him a theater. He was about 10 years older than I was, and he did this musical, She Loves Me, starring a Canadian star, Barbara Hamilton. And I auditioned and I got into the show. And from there, I think it was the Sugar Shop started after that.
Sugar Shop was the name of the group.
Sugar Shop was the name of the first group, yes.
Right.
And that became very successful.
Right. And you guys toured, yes, I'm assuming?
Yes, we were on the Ed Sullivan Show. We were on the Johnny Carson Show. Someone dug up on the show I was working on in Vancouver, the guy who played my son, a wonderful actor named Zachary Smedu. He found that there's a video of us on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
And he came in and put it up to me, my face, and made me watch it. And you know what?
God.
It was pretty good.
I'll bet.
Yeah. I mean, you don't get on the Ed Sullivan Show, for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It was, it was very much, and we recorded at Capitol Records an album in the Tower, famous Capitol Records building.
Right.
And I was like, I guess 18 maybe.
Wow.
I was young.
Yeah. You're going through this sort of metamorphosis into folk singer, successful member of a folk group. Yes.
Yes. I wouldn't say folk. I would say Fifth Dimension-ish.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How many members?
There were 4 singers and 3 backup.
Oh.
Peter and I were obsessed with the Mamas and the Papas. We loved their harmony. We loved the flow of their voices.
Right.
And that's what we set out to create, and we did.
Now, how did Godspell happen? Because this is a sort of turn.
Yes.
Did the group break up?
Yes. The group broke up, and we were on tour. Then this other, and then Peter started this other group with some other people called the Canadian Rock Theatre, which there's also an album of that in which I'm featured as the character Jesus, and we were singing songs from Jesus Christ Superstar, Godspell, and so I was singing on the road when Save the People, which is Jesus' first song in Godspell, and when I got back to Toronto, they were holding auditions for Godspell, and I thought, I'm going to go in and audition for Jesus, so I took my guitar, and I had a big mane of golden locks, afro. It really, literally was. When you see pictures of me, I think, who is that? But it was quite defined. I remember that day of the final callbacks when Eugene got up and Marty got up and Gilda got up, and I got up and sang Save the People with my guitar, and I got a standing ovation.
Whoa. Wow.
So I thought, that went well.
How often does that happen? Yeah.
Gene Levy likes to tell the story. So a standing ovation, and then over the microphone you hear, okay, Eugene Levy, next. and he does the impersonation of him, trying to find his glasses. It's so Eugene.
Yes.
And getting up to go up and sing his number. And that's when it all, and then that's when everything really changed.
I would think. The fact that it just so happened that group of people were cast in that show together, and they all went off to, how often does that happen? Where one event. Well,
it doesn't happen. And there's a documentary.
Oh, there is.
As we speak, that's going to be quite extensive. That Judd Apatow is one of the executive producers of about that very time with those people.
Right.
It's going to be I think a 4-hour, 2-part documentary about this group of people and how it all happened and what it was. Because so many people are just staggered by those,
Yeah. The fact that everyone in that group became extraordinary, luminaries in the canon, in our business.
Almost everyone.
What was the rehearsal room like? Do you remember?
Chris, I remember being well, first of all, seeing those auditions, seeing those people, although, and falling in love with Gilda, I guess that day.
Mm-hmm. Which was easy to do.
Oh,
yeah. She was very lovable.
She was intoxicating.
Yep.
And then we went to a party for the cast, and I realized, and I remember this so distinctly, I thought, this is not a normal group of people. You know, I knew that I was amongst a pretty heady group of people, and really funny.
Yeah.
You know, I've never laughed so hard ever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just didn't end.
Yeah.
It was just unstoppable. And it was magic, that show, for all of us.
Now, that cast didn't repeat for the film, right?
No. I was the only. No, that was the weird thing, is that we opened at the Royal Alex Theatre in Toronto, which is a beautiful old theatre, and I, obviously went through the rehearsal, blah, 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 and the previews, and it opened, and it was, you know, a huge success. And then about a month later or less, I was gone to do the movie, because the director of the movie saw the opening night of the Toronto production. Mm-hmm. I actually read about it in the paper that I was going to play Jesus in the movie. I mean, I didn't even have an age. I didn't have, you know, it's like I was young. That's
crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
You did the movie almost immediately after?
Almost immediately, and there was a lot of and Don Scardino,
right,
who was my good friend. I made sure that he was cast, because I was so that cast was so in my heart, and I wanted them to be well taken care of.
Right.
And Don, I persuaded Edgar Lansbury in New York, who we just lost recently, who was a wonderful producer. Mm-hmm. I said, "There's only one person who can replace me. It's Don Scardino. He lives, you know, he's in New York. You must meet him." And they hired him, and I completely cast him in that. I want them to be happy.
Yeah. So from Toronto, where did you end up? Did you end up in New York?
Yes, I went to do the movie. I was living in a sublet on Bleecker Street, and I always knew that I always wanted to live in New York.
Right.
I mean, even as a kid, my mother would come home from New York with Broadway shows, albums, and play them for us.
Right.
I always knew the theater was always my goal. And so I basically moved to New York.
Yeah.
I moved to New York when I was 21, I think, 22. And then that's where I've been.
Were there things about New York that provided awakenings for you in terms of your food experience, your culinary experience?
Yes, this is kind of embarrassing, but there was a restaurant years ago called Rusquet's.
Oh, yes, I remember it. Yeah.
And it was up on Columbus and around 74th.
Yep.
And it was very high-end, small, had a long counter.
Yeah.
And I used to go there for breakfast, and I had no money. And I would root around for pennies. And I did this one day, where I had enough pennies to get the continental breakfast at the Rusquet's, because that meant more to me than anything.
That was kind of an actor hangout, as was remember the Cherry?
Yes.
Which was much more of a diner?
Yes.
In the same area.
Rusquet's was overpriced, delicious food.
Mm-hmm. Anything that stood out other than your continental breakfast?
Everything on their menu was good. There was I also got into macrobiotics, and there was a place called Suen, also up there on the upper.
Yep.
And I got very involved. I actually took a cooking course in macrobiotics, and I became obsessed with it. It made so much sense to me, and I think it really did affect my health tremendously in a positive way.
In a positive way, right?
Without question.
Right.
And so I started making, I think I tried to make Gilda something once, and she would have none of it.
I'm just laughing at the memory.
Yeah.
So now you're in New York. You're doing. You're starting to do Broadway shows.
No, I think my first, what did I do? I think my first job was, I did Ghosts off Broadway at the Roundabout Theater at the time when the Roundabout Theater was still under a supermarket on 26th and 8th Avenue.
I did a show there about the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. We met around then, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. We've known each other for a long time. I did the voice of the turtle there.
Yes. And who was
Jay Cameron?
Yes, J. Smith Cameron, who I did Lend Me a Tenor with.
Uh-huh.
And I just did a few months ago, we did Love Letters as a benefit at the Irish Rep Theater in New York.
How great.
And we hadn't worked together since we did Lend Me a Tenor, and we had the most wonderful week together.
Oh, I'm sure.
We're in touch, but we don't see each other much. But
Jay Cameron, who our audience would probably know from Succession, but
yes.
Who has the history of having an extraordinary stage career in New York. And Patricia Elliott as well was in that show.
Patricia Elliott, I did Tartuffe with, and I did something else with. And she was really one of a kind.
Oh yeah,
Elliott. She was like a theater creature.
Yeah,
she never stopped.
No,
it was her life, really her life.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So along the way, then you're doing shows in New York. You're starting to do Broadway shows. How did the television and film career evolve as a sort of natural outgrowth of your Broadway work?
No, not exactly. Really, I've done a couple of TV movies. I think the Liberace movie. I did the TV Liberace movie, playing Liberace, and then I didn't work for a couple of years, as every agent said.
Yeah,
because I was a little too convincing.
Oh yeah, I had that conversation when I did Dog Day Afternoon.
I'm sure you did.
My agent, who was gay, who told me this could be career suicide. I
was told by probably one of the agents in the same office you were in.
Right.
Because I remember, my friends at the time were Kevin Kline, Bill Hurt, and they were all going off doing movies.
Yeah.
And I thought, and my agent said, you can't be gay. You won't have a movie career.
Mm-hmm.
Literally.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm just not going to talk about it, but I can't pretend I'm not gay.
Yeah.
I mean, I just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Ironically, years later, when somebody said, "Oh, you came out," I said, "I've never been in."
Just take a look.
I've just never
on the screen, for God's sake. Yeah.
Yeah, but and anyway, it was. I see it now in a way, and it doesn't really. I'm having a great life, and I've had a great life.
Aye.
And so I really think that everything that is a part of me goes into making the career, and I have no regrets.
Yeah. So then you did the Liberace. Then nothing happened for a couple of years. Then things started rolling again?
What happened was I was called in out of the blue to read for Alias. I had done a movie with Paul Schrader called Light Sleep, where I played a Swiss drug dealer.
Yeah.
Small but really interesting role in a really interesting movie.
Yeah.
And that led to nothing. But in terms of film, but somehow J.J. Abrams, who knew my career from stage, had an interest in me to play Jack Bristow in Alias. And honestly, he changed my life.
Oh. Because
he saw something in me that I don't think, to play this really complicated, double spy, changed my life.
Mm.
And of course it started, it really started a television career and a relationship with Jennifer Garner and Bradley Cooper and Ron Rifkin and all those people that are still in my life.
Right. Yeah.
But I just give him credit for that.
Yeah, an extraordinary guy. I did a stretch on Felicity.
Oh.
And I had no idea where where JJ came up with, casting me, because it wasn't a matter of my going in and reading. They called and said, we want you to do this stretch on Felicity. And I did. And it was a great experience.
JJ, we don't see each other much, but we had a 3-hour lunch a couple of months ago that was as if no time had passed.
Ah, how great.
And his wife, Katie, and, another daughter is Gracie Abrams, who's a huge star, touring with Taylor Swift and opening for her. And,
wow.
Yeah,
how
Gracie
great.
Abrams.
Oh, I had no idea. One thing I wanted to talk about, because I need to circle at least occasionally back to the culinary, is...
I'm going to try to help you with that.
Thank you so much. Is that...
I love to eat. That's it.
Yeah. No. I assume that. I think I've had a number of meals with you where that's clear. I talk to a lot of people who work in our business about catering.
Yeah.
And favorite locations and or shows that they've done where the catering has been splendid or when it's been excrement. Any memories of that? Because I know I have a couple of movie locations where the food was just transcendent. But of course in Europe.
Yes, when I shot this miniseries years ago in Paris and all over Europe, the food was much better. I've never eaten food. Like that on any set in America.
No. What was the show?
Oh, it was an unwatchable biography of Ernest Hemingway. I played Ernest Hemingway from like a teenager to the end of his life, and I think I was in my 30s when I did it. So it kind of worked. The makeup was the best thing in it,
and the catering.
Catering was great. I don't remember what I had, although we also shot when we got to what was then Belgrade, Yugoslavia, since not now, and then the food kind of went
downhill. Yeah. What was it? Do you remember the ritual itself? Because I have very vivid memory of European set food lunches, for instance, being totally different from the ones we get in this country.
The French system is different. They're called French hours, and you eat as you go. So you never actually take a lunch break. But the food is always available, and it's always fantastic. Mm-hmm. But, again, it takes me back to, as a type 1 diabetic, I couldn't, I had to, for a long time, I didn't avoid the sweet table. But then I realized it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
The food was always the simplest, and I always had to get plain food. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an event for me.
Right.
It was sort of like, how do I deal with this today?
Right.
Which makes it a little different.
Yeah. Oh, totally understandable. And one of the things I have been completely taken with as I read about you, I know you as a person, but not as much about your career, is the variety and the length of your career. The fact that you started as a singer when you were young, and basically you started working and for I tell this story, and I don't think I've ever told you. When one of my daughters was, 5 or 6 years old, and she was sitting with a friend having ice cream or pizza or something, and the friend's mother was with them, and they were talking about what their daddies did. And the mother asked her own daughter what her daddy did, and he said, "Oh, he makes wires in houses." And mom said, "Yeah, he's an electrician. That's right." And she turned to my daughter and said, "You know what your daddy does, don't you?" And my daughter said, "Yeah, he looks for work." And I think that despite the fact that we're, as actors, always looking for work, that to have a career of longevity and quality is unusual.
Yeah.
And this has been your life as an actor.
Yes.
Have you ever reflected on how that transpired?
People say, "Oh, you work all the time," which is
not true.
Well, no, of course not. But I know that I've done so many things, and they replay them all the time. So people think I'm always working. But from my perspective, I do see it now as kind of like, wow, it's incredible, and you're still doing it, and people still want you to do it.
Yeah.
At this age. And I think because I've never, ever thought of retiring, I've never, ever even considered not doing it.
Yes.
The biggest problem I have now is actually finding something that I think is worth doing.
Yeah.
Because it's rare.
Yeah. And it was a calling.
Without question.
And I think one of the things that I have, in my perhaps more limited experience in terms of the length of the career and the breadth of the career, but the fact that when we went into this, we didn't go into it to become famous. We went into it because we wanted to have a career as an actor.
Yeah.
And a career meant longevity.
Yes.
And so we got experience, and we watched people who were really good and aspired to be like them, rather than it's being about their being famous and that's why we wanted to be like them.
Right.
So it fosters more a mindset, I think, of this is my career rather than I have to keep being famous or I'm done.
Right.
I'm finished.
It didn't define me. It was just what I felt, and this maybe will sound pretentious.
Please.
That I was born to do. There was nothing. There was no other choice for me.
Yeah.
And I remember as a young kid or as a teenager, all my friends were so jealous of me because I knew what I wanted to do, and no one else did.
Yeah.
And I remember those conversations, and they said, "Well, how do you?" I said, "Because I knew from a very early age." The minute I made someone laugh and I got that react, I mean that there's a neurotic need. I understand that.
Yes, right.
But it paid off.
Yeah, that's right.
And the talent didn't come from me. It came from my genetic makeup and God.
Yes.
I don't take it for granted, and I still don't. And especially now that I'm old and I'm getting honored all the time for things, I think, stop it. I feel like my life is over. And it's like, because it's so, it's disconcerting in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
And I appreciate it too.
It's humbling.
It is humbling.
Yeah. I feel that when I go to these, to Comic-Cons.
Yes.
The outpouring of love from people for things that I've been in, not necessarily things that I'm responsible for, but things that I've been in is very humbling. I have one final question because we have to conclude at some point.
All right.
And I always ask my guests this question. If you are somewhere in your current life or somewhere in your past adult life where a smell or a taste takes you back to a moment when you were a kid that has to do with food, or with a moment that was surrounded by food, a holiday or whatever, what would that moment be?
It's painfully simple. It would be my father making French toast on Sunday morning that I could smell when I got up, because I'd never tasted. I can't. I can only associate him with that,
right? Because
he made French toast, and I thought it was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted in my life.
Do you make French toast?
God, no. It's like just French toast, go right to the hospital. Yeah,
right. Victor Garber, I want to thank you so much for being on Cooking by Heart.
It's a great thrill to see you and to be with you, and I'm so happy you asked me to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. All right, take care.
You too.